Hi, today we're going to talk about strategy. So you've been listening to my lectures, you now know about the economic and political systems, and you know that you need to go international in order to have a successful business, and you know how to select the country that is the best fit for your product. The next question you have to answer is what strategy you choose. And so today we are going to talk about what strategies we kind of know of, when each of them works best, and which one may be the most suitable one for the type of business that you have. Now, I recommend that you start this lecture by watching this short video. It's a TED Talk by Simon Sinek, who talks about some of the fundamentals of business strategy. So he's talking about the importance of why rather than what. I also recommend watching this TED video instead of reading his actual book. He has a book, I believe, called Start With Why. I just read it, and I didn't find it very useful, meaning that the book is like 300 or 400 pages, and it's basically nothing new compared to the TED Talk. So it's a lot of noise, but it really boils down to a few pages of useful text. So if you watch the video, the TED Talk, you'll pretty much have all his book in that 15-minute presentation. But it's a very interesting message, so I recommend that you pause here and watch that video now. It will be useful, and we will be making references to it throughout the lecture. Now, before we get into the business strategy, I want to say a few words about what a strategy is in general and how they work in different areas of life. So the other day I was reading a book for my kids about ecosystems, and one of the very interesting ideas that I had from that reading for toddlers essentially is that in order to be successful, you don't have to be, I guess cool is the right word. You just have to find your niche. So for example, when you look at an ecosystem, for example, let's take the jungles. In the jungles, you will find all kinds of organisms living, thriving, enjoying life. And many of them are extremely successful if you judge success by how long those organisms, those species have been around. So you would have, for example, elephants, and elephants eat, I don't know, leaves and grass. And you would have pythons and snakes, and they eat birds. And then you have leopards that eat just about anything they can, catch. And then you have antelopes that eat grass, but then leopards eat antelopes. And then you have grass that is eaten by antelopes, but then when antelopes poop, grass eats those nutrients. And then you have beetles and bugs that eat, again, somebody's poop maybe, or decomposed grass, and use that to survive. And then you have worms, and then you have bacteria and viruses. And yes, I assume most of us would like to be kind of cool animals like the leopard or maybe the elephant. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that leopards or elephants are more successful than, for example, beetles or viruses are. In fact, in some respect, maybe even worms or beetles are more successful, because many of those species have been around literally for millions of years, and long before we had even mammals. And so while they may not look cool to us, they are successful. They found their niche, and in that small niche, they are much more successful, they're much more productive, they are much more likely to survive than, for example, an elephant or a snake. So the point here is that in the ecosystems, in order to be successful, you have to find your narrow niche, and you have to push everyone else from that niche so that you are the only competitor there. And basically that's how you survive, that's how you become successful. And to a large extent, this is the same idea in business. So in order to have a successful business, you have to find a particular market niche, and you have to become the best player in that particular market niche. You may be as cool and big and successful as, for example, Apple, Or you may be something completely different but still very successful. For example, there are all kinds of businesses, like for example funeral homes, right? It doesn't sound cool, but I was very surprised to know that there are several of those in the small town where I live now, and some of them have been around literally for over 100 years. So it's a family business, highly successful, not very big. It provides the services that we don't want to think of, but they make a healthy profit. In fact, their profit margins may be much higher than those of Apple. And yeah, I mean, successful. Now, there is a big difference, though, between ecosystems, and business systems. And the difference is that in the ecosystems, in the biological world, you can't really choose what niche you will be competing in. So we kind of are born with a DNA that predetermines how we look like, what we can and what we cannot do, and there is not much we can do to change our physique. I suppose we can, go to the gym and work out and train and become a little stronger or faster or maybe better looking, and so that may increase our chances of survival, but there is still a substantial limitation as to what we can do, how we can develop. In the business world, the good news is that you are basically the creator. So it's your business. You can design it whichever way you want. You can basically instill it with whatever DNA you want. And even if the business is functioning, you can still make substantial changes. I mean, once the organizational culture has established itself, it's more difficult to make changes, but it's still possible. So you, as the business owner, you can make those changes. So you can design and decide on the strategy that you will be taking to make that business successful. And you can change the size of your business, the way you do things. So I guess it's all up to you. And so today's lecture is going to talk about those choices that you have to make, as well as what kind of possible answers to each of the dilemma you can give. Now, the textbook, if you're taking this course for credit, or just about any textbook on strategy, has all kinds of fancy schmancy diagrams and decision trees that are presumably used to develop a strategy. And so here is one that is a very typical one. And so it says here that you first have to identify your company mission and goals, and then you identify your core competency and value creating activities, and then you formulate the strategy. Two thoughts on this sort of diagram. On the one hand, it looks like completely useless information. I mean, sounds so boring, so bureaucratic, so technical, that just about every student would fall asleep looking at this. At the same time, it's so obvious. I mean, of course, that's what we do. I mean, why would I spend time on that? I mean, it makes sense. At the same time, I'm here to argue that actually this makes perfect sense. I mean, this is what you should do. Most businesses never, especially small businesses, never actually go through that process. We kind of think that, we know what needs to be done, and so we never actually have a dedicated strategy planning session where we actually do ask the questions: what are our core competencies? What exactly do we need to do? And maybe that's a problem for some businesses. I mean, maybe they actually should take time out from answering emails and dealing with clients and, advertising and stuff like that, and actually try to formulate the strategy. What in most cases happens, or how people decide what they do and how they do it, is much less sophisticated, much less academic. And I'm not necessarily saying that that's a problem. I mean, many of these non-academic approaches result in successful businesses, but in many cases, even more could have been done had it been done right. So, for example, here are some stories from my friends who shared with me why they got into the business that they are now in, how those decisions were made. And in many cases you would hear something like that, like, for example, well, I graduated from college and the market was bad and I couldn't find a good job at a top company, but my parents owned this, small store, and so I was helping around the store, and then my parents retired, so I kind of took over the business, and that's why I have that business now. And I do things the way I do is because, well, that's the way it's always been done there, and so it seems to work for us. It's not making me super rich, but it's paying my bills. Or, for example, I was talking to another friend of mine who's selling tires, like, the tires for cars. And again, I asked him, so why did you decide to sell tires? Why this business? And he said, well, I had some cash and I wanted to start my own business and I didn't know what and how I should do. And then one day I met that guy and he said, well, I'm selling tires and, you buy them here, you sell them here. I can connect you with the people, with the suppliers. And yeah, if you want to try, it's going to cost you a few $1,000s to open up the store and buy the first shipment of tires and, give it a try. That's what I did and that's what works for me. And I use the same strategy that everybody in that sort of business does, and it seems to work for me. So again, all of those are legitimate approaches. All of those make perfect sense, though if they used a more sophisticated, more methodological strategy approach or strategy development approach, I bet they would have done better. And so hopefully by the end of this lecture, you will at least know what choices you have, and perhaps some of them you will find are better for you than what you're doing now. So we will be going from one step to another, and at each step of your company management you have to make a choice, or basically a strategy choice. And so we'll talk about them one by one. And so in the context of international business, one of the choices you would have to make is whether you want to use a so-called multinational strategy or whether you want to use a so-called global strategy. And the difference between those two is that the multinational strategy is one where you modify your products for each of the markets where you operate. So you try to make them suitable for the tastes of the consumers in each market. The global strategy is one where you use the approach where basically one size fits all, where you make the same product and sell it the same way in every single market. So obviously each one has its pros and cons, and so let's talk about them one by one. So for example, multinational strategy. Ford Motor Company is a very good example of this strategy. Ford has a different lineup of models in different regions. So for example, what Ford sells in Europe is different from what Ford sells in the United States. The models are different. In fact, with a few exceptions, every single model that Ford sells in the United States is different, for example, from what Ford sells in Europe. For example, in Europe there are models called Ford Mondeo, and then you have Ford Ka, and they never existed in the United States. They were never sold in the United States. On the other hand, you, for example, would have Ford Taurus or Ford Mustang. Those are typical American models, and I don't think they've been sold anywhere outside the United States. Now, the advantage of this strategy obviously is that you can cater to the needs of the clients in different markets and sell them or offer them what they really want. For example, the small Ford Ka it's a very small car, and so Europeans with their cramped streets and small spaces, and perhaps in some countries smaller income, it seems like it's a good choice for them. You probably won't be able to sell many or any of those cars in the United States. Here, roads are wider. People, again, on average tend to make a little more money, so people tend to buy something larger. So you could have probably Ford Fiesta as the smallest one, and even American Fiesta is different from the European Fiesta. But Ford Ka for American market, it just would be a bad fit. So you have to make those choices. Another big advantage is that by having more products for different markets, sometimes, when the conditions change, you can bring one product from one market to another market and basically, capitalize on that fit. For example, in the United States, up until 2003-04, Ford was selling in the United States only large cars like Ford trucks and Ford Taurus, which is a fairly large, car by the European standards, things like that. And then the crisis came first after the 2001, and then even more so in 2008. And the price of gas went dramatically first up, then down, then up and down again. And so in 2003 through 2008 or so, the price of gas was extremely high. So if always it was fluctuating around what, $30-40 per barrel, in the period in basically 2000s, the price of gas went up to about $150 per barrel. So the gas here in the United States always was around $1 a gallon, so it's like 25 cents a liter. And then it went up to about $4 a gallon, so to about $1 a liter. So again, by the European standards, it could be still a low price, but for Americans, it was all of a sudden much more. So it's like 4 times as expensive as always. And so all of a sudden, all those big trucks became less interesting because it's very expensive to drive one. It uses, a lot of gas. Those gas guzzlers lost, consumer appeal. And so while GM and Chrysler didn't have backup options, so they only sold and made those big models, and all of a sudden they were left in a situation where the cars they make consumers no longer want, and they don't make anything else. So they had to go basically into the bankruptcy, while Ford was able to survive. And one of the things that Ford was doing to survive was to bring some of those smaller models from Europe to the United States. Like, for example, Ford Focus was one of those models that were sold in Europe from 1999, must have been, or maybe 98. But in the United States, it was introduced in 2003, I believe, for the first time. And Americans loved it. I mean, it was a European model. It was smaller, more thrifty, and it seemed to have worked very well for the United States. So by having those choices, Ford was able to, move products around the markets and save on research and development. The downside of this approach, obviously, is that it's more expensive if you have to develop different products for different markets, if you have to use different promotion strategy, develop different advertising, and so on and so on and so on. It just costs a lot more money. So it requires specific market knowledge, and you don't have those economies of scale. And so all of a sudden your profit margins going down. And while you can reach a wider consumer base, you probably will be making less money per product. The opposite strategy would be to go global strategy, basically one size fits all. And probably the best examples here would be the electronics, especially when you talk about like Apple computers or Apple electronics, I guess, whatever the name now is. So they not only make computers. So for example, if you look at iPods or iPhones, those are identical products in every single market. They may change the user interface, so the actual language may be different, but other than that, it uses the same operating system. It's basically the same product. And by selling the same models in the same, all around the world, Apple can make millions and millions of those same products, and so the marginal production cost goes down and profitability goes up. The disadvantage obviously is that you can alienate some of potential customers. So maybe, I don't know, in some countries they would have bought your product had you made just some slight changes and tweaks, and you haven't, and so they haven't bought your product. They bought somebody's product, somebody else's product, competition. So, but there is always cost and benefit here. Now, here is a question for you. If you're taking this course for credit, this is what is likely to appear on the exam. And the answer is E, multinational strategy. That's one when you offer or develop different products for different markets. Now, when one works better than the other? Well, it depends a lot on the product and on the consumers. So, for example, when you deal with products that are designed for older people, like baby boomers, people who are like, your parents, I guess, people who are approaching their retirement age. Those people, many or most of them, grew up in a kind of globalized world, and many of them have developed tastes that are unique to their area where they grew up. And it seems like if you are making products for them, like it could be medication or clothing and fashion items or entertainment, you probably will see a lot of different tastes in different locations. And so if you want to be successful globally, you probably will have to make adjustments for each market to cater to this sort of population, to this sort of consumer segment. At the same time, if you're making products for younger people like generations Y and X, people who were born in the 90s or 2000s, most of them seem to be growing up, or at least in developed countries, most of them are growing up in this modern global culture, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. Most of them watch the same type of stuff on TV. Most of them, wear the same type of clothing, have same interests. And so it seems like if those are products for them, probably you can get away with a global approach. So if you're making computers, media, entertainment for younger people, chances are you will not have as much need to adjust products for specific markets as it would be the case with older people. There may be, though, some exceptions. For example, Harley Davidson, the motorcycle maker, it tends to be more popular among somewhat older people, so the younger generation seems to like motorcycles of a different kind. Yet Harley Davidson sells the same product, same design all around the planet, and they seem to be doing extremely well. So there was a time when they were, a few years ago, when it wasn't going so well for them, but it seems like their sales are picking up again, and it seems like they are achieving that success specifically because they're making that one particular type of motorcycle. So even though most of the consumers of their products are kind of older, so it seems like they don't want to, there is no need to adjust those motorcycles or types of motorcycles for each market. But I guess here it's a little different story because Harley Davidson, it kind of sells a particular image, and so if you start adjusting it to different markets, you will lose that image. So, but again, the point here is that sometimes even with segments, consumer segments that are known to be very picky and market specific, sometimes even for them, you would find a product that may actually work better when you go with a global strategy. Now, another set of choices you may have to make is basically your size, and not only the size overall, but also changes in size. And so in many cases, in order to survive, in order to be successful, you have to use what we call a growth strategy. So that's when you have to make yourself bigger in order to survive. And so there are a number of examples here when companies became successful by acquiring, by merging, by getting bigger. So for example, 3M, it's a company that makes all kinds of products, normally products that require some sort of innovation. Like, for example, Post-its are made by them, all kinds of things that they make, And so 3M uses what we call internal growth options. So 3M is known for kind of using a strategy of being almost like a collection of companies. So they make all kinds of products, probably thousands of them, definitely hundreds. I'm not sure if it's thousands. And so the way they develop those new products is that they have small teams working within the company, inside the company. And once a team comes up with a new product, they're basically given a lot of autonomy and support. And so they almost manage it as if it was an independent company, independent product. And so by catering to the needs and supporting those smaller companies, 3M is able to generate a lot of ideas for new products, new developments, sometimes even kind of new industries within the company. And once a successful product is identified, they try to grow that into a larger subsidiary, which eventually in many cases becomes a big subsidiary. And so by doing so, they are able to grow. And by now, as I said, most of the things made out of paper, plastic, chemicals, many of them in fact are made by 3M. So all that sort of stuff, they're just very good at it. Some other companies grow by merging and acquiring other companies, or merging with and acquiring other companies. Lenovo is a very good example, and so I'm going to show you here a short video so you can see how that.
Now to big business news today. One of America's great companies is selling part of itself to the Chinese. IBM was a pioneer in the development of the personal computer. IBM is selling its PC division for nearly $2 billion. Another example of commercial life in which the Chinese are coming. ABC's Mark Litke is in Beijing.
Over the past decade, China has become the world's manufacturer of, well, just about everything. From garments to gadgets, increasingly sophisticated, increasingly high quality. Now, China is determined to step out on the global economic stage in a big way. Today's announcement will come as a shock to some Americans, but get used to it.
China is on its way to becoming for global manufacturing what Saudi Arabia is for global oil.
The Chinese company will instantly become the world's third largest computer firm. It will have a respected foreign brand, giving it more prestige at home, and it will have immediate access to IBM's well-established global network. And that is the goal of a growing number of large Chinese firms here, like Haier and TCL. Never heard of them? You will. Haier established itself as China's top appliance maker. Now its mini refrigerator can be found in small homes and college dorms all over the world. TCL, China's biggest TV maker, bought Thomson Electronics from France this year, making it the largest TV producer in the world. China is not only making everything, they're making everything we need.
China is becoming more important, but not just for Chinese companies. We source and build quite a bit of product in China.
Chinese firms still have a long way to go learning how to operate on a global scale. Their experience in managing and manufacturing outside China is still very limited. And as the Japanese learned in the 1980s, just because you have the economic clout to buy up foreign companies doesn't mean you can manage them well. But China's growing number of muscular companies have already proven they can win on their own turf, and they're ready to take on the world. Mark Litke, ABC News, Beijing.
So look at Lenovo now. It's been about 10 years since it bought IBM's personal computer division, and nobody knew about Lenovo beforehand. But now that it's bigger, now that it acquired IBM's patents and consumers and suppliers and image, all of a sudden Lenovo is a major player, and so it was able to grow dramatically because of that acquisition. And by now they don't even put the IBM type of reference on their computers. For the first few years, I remember it was actually IBM Lenovo, the label, so that people could make the connection. Today Lenovo by itself is a respected brand, and basically now still kind of carries forward the IBM's legacy and image of a high quality product. Now, sometimes, on the other hand, when something goes wrong, you have to use what we call a retrenchment strategy. That's where you have to get smaller if something goes wrong. If I had to make another reference back to the bio world, to the ecosystems, it would be when an animal gets trapped in a trap. Sometimes you have to literally cut off your limb, your paw, your leg, and in order to survive. And so that's what sometimes organizations have to do. So they have to use the retrenchment strategy. So my favorite example here would be General Motors. So as you know, General Motors used to make cars under some 12 or so brands. You had Buick and Chevrolet, and you had Oldsmobile and Saturn, and GM trucks and GMC, and so all kinds of brands. And some of them were less successful, and when the crisis of 2008 struck and GM had to go through bankruptcy, the only way forward they saw was to actually get smaller. And so they did cut a number of brands, like for example, starting in 2008 and until now, they no longer make Pontiac and Hummer and Oldsmobile and Saturn. So they just basically completely forgot about those things. They cut them. They were not profitable. They didn't, they were not loved enough by the consumers. And so by getting rid of those less underperforming brands, GM was able to focus on the few that they left. And I believe they left Chevy, Buick, Corvette, GM, and I think that's it, right? And so by focusing on those fewer, more successful brands, they were able to improve their profitability and survive. Now, obviously, when you go through retrenchment, when you get smaller, one of the big disadvantages is that you have to hurt some people. So if you get smaller, you have to lay off people, and it's not easy. I mean, there will be strikes, there will be walkouts, there will be protests. You may damage your image, and that's a difficult thing. So for example, here you have a picture from Canada where GM had some factories, some plants, and when some of those brands were cut, GM had to close off some of those plants, and as you can see, it was not very well taken. So that was not the best time for GM. So, but again, in order to survive, sometimes you have to make sacrifices. Finally, sometimes companies use what we call a combination strategy, and in fact, GM was kind of using more of that because it was using both growth but also a retrenchment strategy at the same time. So you kind of get rid of some stuff, but at the same time you add new things. And so GM, while it was dropping some underperforming brands like, as I said, Buick and Pontiac, Hummer, Oldsmobile. I think Buick is still around, so I may have made a mistake here. But at the same time, it was adding completely new products. Like, for example, it added to its lineup the electrical vehicle called Volt, and it's kind of gaining some traction. So it's still not a major player, but it's gaining some recognition and traction. And so while it was getting rid of the underperforming brands and products, it was adding some stuff that is completely new, not even close to what was done or made before. And so again, by doing that, you can probably even further maximize your chances. Again, it's expensive, so it not necessarily would be the best strategy for some, but would be a good one for others who have the resources and have no other way out. Now, here is a question for you to see if you now know the terminology. And a good example, good answer here would be a combination. Now, imagine that you now have a product. The question is, how do you go about presenting it to the world? How do you make sure that your product is popular and enough of it is bought to pay your bills? One of the possible strategies you can use is what we call differentiation strategy. So it's a very successful strategy if you do it right. And so you basically try to differentiate yourself from competition. You try to present yourself as different from the rest. A very, very good example of this strategy is Apple. Apple has been able to differentiate itself from the other computer makers, and you have all kinds of, Dell and HP and Acer and Siemens and whatever else, and all of them use Microsoft Windows, or most of them use Microsoft Windows as their operating system. And while they're made by many different makers, they all look the same in a sense. And Apple was the only player, or has been the only player, that is kind of using something completely different. So it's differentiating itself, it's creating almost like a cult following. So we are different. They even at some point, when Steve Jobs rejoined the company after being at Next for some time, so they even waved a pirate, the Jolly Roger flag above their headquarters to show that they are basically, we are rebels, we are pirates, we are going against the mainstream. And while Apple is now becoming more and more mainstream and basically not that different from those makers that they so drastically or so desperately were trying to differentiate themselves from, they did create that image that we are different. And so that created this, loyal customer base, people who are, as they're called, Mac heads, right? So people who are extremely devoted to Apple. And to promote that idea, they would often have product placement. Like, for example, if you've seen that movie called Legally Blonde, there is a scene there, and you've seen probably a similar scene many times with Apple products, where you would have students, Harvard Law students, all in gray or dark attire, sitting with all those gray computers, and so the camera kind of moves, and then boom, there is this girl in a pink suit with a shiny white, I believe, Apple Mac computer, and so she looks different, and so she stands out, and that's appealing to many people. So many people would buy Apple not because it's a better system or not because it has some certain functions that people need. They just want to be part of that cool, different culture. And so while it's very expensive to use that strategy, because you have to be different, you have to develop your own many things, from design to sometimes operating system in the case of the computers. But if you can do that, you will be different, and there will be people who will be willing to pay higher price for your products just because they are different. So when you look at a Mac computer, technically, I mean, it's using the same microprocessors, it's using the same memory chips. So it's not really faster or has more space or has some programs, software that other computers don't, but it's different, and to many people it's appealing. Yeah, think different. Now, here are some more examples of how differentiation strategy allowed companies make more money. For example, if you go and look at the automakers, you will see that most of them would have different brands, and while the technical characteristics of those cars that are sold under different brands are not very different, one of them would be specifically marketed using the differentiation strategy. We are different, we are better, whatever else, and they will cost much more. So for example, when you look at Lexus versus Toyota, technically Lexus is not that different. Many parts are interchangeable, and if you buy a Toyota, you probably will get the same many things from the car, but it will have a different brand, and it's a brand that has that luxury appeal, so it's specifically designed to be different and as a result more expensive, and many people are willing to pay that extra premium. Same thing with Acura and Honda, so the same thing with Infiniti and Nissan, same thing with, for example, Volkswagen Beetle and Volkswagen Golf. So Volkswagen Beetle is basically same Golf, I mean the same engine, the same wheelbase, but it's made to look different, and it's less practical in many respects, but at the same time it costs more, and many people like it, and they pay more for that product, at least in the United States. Same thing, for example, when you look at the old Hummer. So again, from the technical point of view, it was just a Chevrolet Tahoe made to look, cool. So it was using Chevy Tahoe's wheelbase, engine, and everything else, but it was made to look different, and to many people it was appealing, and many people were buying Hummers, and so they buy it and they feel like they are now different and defied the world. Same thing, for example, when you look at suits. An Armani suit is just a regular suit that costs $5,000. I mean, again, it's not necessarily better than a good $1,000 suit, but it does have that Armani label, and so that makes you kind of different. People notice you, and people are willing to pay extra just for that label. So I'm not comparing it to a cheap suit, but if you have a good quality suit, but that one label, that's what you're after, so it's not necessarily so much the quality. All right, so here's a question for you. Now, before we answer that question, I want to make a disclaimer that the most likely answer here is still not a perfect answer. And so I'm talking here about the production methods. So companies definitely can differentiate themselves based on quality and based on design, and definitely based on brand image. Warranty and service is definitely also the case. Production method, less so, but sometimes even that could be a differentiating factor. And let me talk about that. So for example, Canadian diamonds are diamonds that are not any better than diamonds, for example, from Africa or from Russia, right? So they are not any clearer or stronger or more beautiful. So the end product will not be any different. But the production method, presumably the diamonds, for example, from Africa, kind of have blood on them. So if you've seen the movie Blood Diamond, you know what I'm talking about. And so presumably, there was some slave labor used, and maybe even child labor. And people could have been killed in the process, of extracting those diamonds from the soil and selling them. And so Canada tries to present its product as clean diamonds. So our diamonds were, found and extracted and, processed using the fair trade practices. And so if you buy a Canadian diamond, you kind of think that you buy a product that was produced using a method that is fair and that is environmentally friendly and everything else. And so as a result, many people would prefer to buy a Canadian diamond and pay more for it than for an African one, just because they feel that it's, it was based on a better production process, production method, especially when people buy diamonds for like wedding rings and things like that. So things where, you want to have them a good aura. So that's where, you often go to and buy a Canadian diamond, and they actually come with a certificate that specifically says that it's a Canadian diamond, not some bloody diamond from Africa. And so that's one, I guess, one of those rare cases when even the production method could be used to differentiate a product, even though the actual product itself is not any different. Then you also have so-called low-cost strategy. Please don't confuse that with the so-called cheap product strategy. No, here we're talking about low cost. So that's where we are talking not about the price of the products per se, we're talking about the production cost, so operating cost. And so because the operating cost can be very, very low, you can offer cheaper products, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the products are cheap. They're just offered at a better price thanks to the low operating cost. And so very good examples would be Costco, or Sam's Club, or IKEA, maybe even a better example. And so those are examples of retailers that sell large quantities of the products. Again, if you're from Europe, it would be Aldi, for example, right? So they sell a large quantity of products, in many cases in large boxes, so it would be not only huge volume per store, but also larger volumes per customer. And they would use very efficient delivery methods, very efficient advertising methods, and by doing so, they can lower the operating cost. So, and by doing so, they can lower the price of the product. So, while, for example, Costco doesn't sell cheap products, I mean, if they sell jeans, it would be usually Levi's jeans, and if they sell shoes, those would be usually Reebok or Nike shoes. And if they say televisions, it would be like Samsung and Sony. So, but the price they can offer on those products is lower than what other retailers can offer because of that volume, because of that efficiency. And so if you've ever been to one of those stores, Aldi, IKEA, Costco, you would see that they have multiple checkouts, like literally 5, 6, 7 sometimes, and maybe even more in larger cities. And literally, only a dozen people would be managing a huge store, and so the volume is so huge that those people, cashiers, they just ring. And in fact, lately they implemented the self-checkout options, and they are becoming now standard basically. So where they don't even use people for you to check out, you just approach the cashier, you scan your items, and you pay with your phone or with your credit card. And so this way, even fewer people are needed to operate this huge warehouse, and that lowers the cost of operating. IKEA is probably even a better example, and IKEA has made a number of strategic choices that dramatically lowered the cost of the product without compromising on quality. So in the furniture business, you have two major expenses. One is the labor, so making the components for your bed or your table or whatever else you buy there is actually not that expensive. Assembling it is expensive, especially if you operate in a country where labor cost is expensive. So the components for, let's say, a table could cost you only, let's say, $10, but to assemble it takes half an hour, and so that's another $10 or even $20 of somebody's time who will be putting it together. Then on top of that, you have to move that stuff. So wherever it's made, let's say, for example, in Sweden, home quarters, or even if it's made in the same country where it's sold, it still has to be moved from the production side to the retailing side, to the store. And so when you take, for example, table, or a bed, or a I don't know, some sort of a closet stuff of those things are mainly empty, right? A table is it's just a box, and so it's empty. It takes a lot of space. And so when you move stuff, obviously that space costs money. So you can put only so many tables on a truck or in a container. And so you have to pay for the whole container while you have only a few tables inside. So what IKEA started doing, as you know, the invention, the strategic choice was that we are not going to assemble our products. We are going to ship them, just the materials, you know, in boxes that are very compact, where you can put literally 20, 40 times more stuff in the same container than if it was assembled. And then we are going to sell it unassembled so that the consumers can assemble them themselves. And by doing so, they were able to dramatically cut their production cost. So we're talking literally like 70% of the total cost cut because of the lower cost of production and transportation. And then on top of that, the store is designed in a way that, you know, again, a huge store, if you've ever been to IKEA, is managed by a very small group of people, by a handful of people. And so that allows further reduce the retailing cost. And so the result, you can sell high quality products at a very low price and a very healthy profit margins. So that's the low cost strategy. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the products would be cheap or low price, low quality. They could be high quality, but delivered at a low cost. Now, focus strategy. Sometimes you would be better off by focusing on a specific, perhaps small, but a very special consumer segment. You may not necessarily have a large customer base because it's only one segment that you kind of cater to. But if you do so, you may be able to get a very sizable profit. For example, in many countries, especially the ones that have large immigrant populations like the United States, Canada, some European countries, you would see those ethnic food stores. So for example, here there is a picture of a food store from well, it's kind of Russian food store in the United States, Babushka, right? And so this one sells food from Russia and from Ukraine, I assume, as well. And most of the people in that store are, the customers in that store are actually of people of, you know, from the former Soviet Union. And so each city has some of those people, and it's a small consumer base. I mean, they would constitute only, I don't know, 1% of the population. Maybe even less than that, but they like that food, and so even if there is only one store in that city, they would drive across the whole town to go and get that particular food. They will pay much more for that food. Like for example, if you buy a bottle of Coca-Cola, let's say 2 liters in the United States, you would be paying, I don't know, what is it, like $2, $3, I don't know, probably even less than that if you buy several, you know, if you buy a case. If you buy that same stuff from Russia, like for example, you know, kvass, technically it's the same thing. I mean, today they don't really use, you know, real production methods, so it's basically the same Coca-Cola, just made to taste a little different. It may cost easily $5, $6, so you're talking about like twice the price and obviously twice the profit. And so again, you wouldn't be able to sell it to a wider consumer base, but to that small niche of customers that specifically need that particular product, you can sell that stuff maybe in smaller quantities, but at a higher profit margin, and as a result you can make much more money. Same thing, for example, with focus on quality, like first class seats in the airplanes. Again, it's not a very large group of people who are willing to pay much more for a little bit less, I mean for a little bit more space, but there is a group of people who do that and are willing to pay a lot more. And if you can cater to the needs of those people, you can dramatically increase prices for your product, and as a result you can make much more money. And here is a question for you. And the answer is combination. And I thought we already had that question. Well, now you know for sure. Now again, I'm going to pause here, and I want to show you a video that talks about the Nike strategy. And many other companies are using the same strategy these days. And let's watch the video and then we'll talk about it. Actually, if you are taking this course for credit, I'm going to post this video file in the folder on Blackboard, Canvas, Moodle, whatever we're using in the course this year. And so this way you can watch it as a separate file. And the reason I don't want to embed it into the lecture is because I believe it's a PBS video, and there may be a copyright violation problem here. And so if it's caught in the, in the video lecture file, the video lecture may be blocked or made inaccessible in some regions. So I don't want that to happen. So pause here, go to the optional videos, and download the video and watch it there. And if you're not one of my formal students, you can just Google and look for the Nike's Focus, I believe it's called. So look for Nike Paradigm and you will easily find that video online, and I recommend that you watch it. A very educational piece of work. So anyway, but the main messages here of the video is that Nike, like many other manufacturers, are not actually making anything. They are managing a brand. And so the speaker in the video tries to present it as a negative thing. And I suppose there is some validity to the claims she's making, though she's a kind of known anti-globalist and one of those people who don't like big corporations, and again, for a good reason. But if we drop all that touchy-feely, moral, do right things and just look at the business strategy, actually this may not be only the way of the future. This may actually be the best thing that has happened since the Industrial Revolution. So what Nike does is they don't really make products, they outsource production, and they focus purely on managing the brand. So they basically create the product designs, they promote them, they advertise them, and they do all the other things that need to be done to kind of promote the product, but somebody else, factories in China and the Philippines, are making the actual product. And so they're not affiliated with Nike, as far as they're not a subsidiary of Nike. So Nike doesn't hire those people. Nike gives a contract and somebody else hires those people. And so when the whole thing started, obviously there were many jobs literally slashed in, let's say, the United States or in Europe, and outsourced to, for example, Asia. And so that was quite a problem, because you had a factory that was making shoes, and all of a sudden it just moved somewhere else. So for people, that's a big problem. At the same time, what that allows is basically a division of labor. So that's basically, we do design and you do production, and by doing so we can actually become better at what we do. And so there is no really need to for us to be able to do everything. So if you happen to be in a rich country like the United States or Germany, and if you happen to hear a lot of complaints about how jobs are leaving and going to, for example, China, well, think about it. Do you really want to keep that production here in the United States or in Germany or whatever country you come from? Wouldn't it be better if you had lots of companies like Nike that specialize in brand management, and the production is outsourced, for example, to Foxconn in China that employs over 1 million people, and they are excellent at that. In fact, today Foxconn, what they do, not just about, I mean, there are no analogous companies here in the United States that can manage production so well. I mean, that's just a different function, and so big deal. I mean, let's focus on what we do best and outsource what they do best. But there is even more important thing that I want to say. I just read a book called Why All Businesses, The Era of Small Business, I believe it's called, Why All Businesses Will Be Small. And so the book has a very powerful message, and it says that we are now entering the era when outsourcing becomes so easy that there will be no large companies left, companies that make everything in-house. So today, if you wanted to outsource just about anything, it's extremely easy to find people, companies that can do that stuff for you. And it's not necessarily outsourcing across borders, even though that is part of the game as well. The point here is that today you can so easily find manufacturers, promoters, accountants, designers, IT people for just about anything, that it doesn't make sense for you to try to learn all those trades and make it in-house. So today there are websites like, for example, Alibaba, the Chinese website, and I believe they have Alibaba Express as an American version. So that's a basically business-to-business product. That's a product where you can buy and order shipment of many different things, and you can order also manufacturing of many different things. So that's a website that basically brings manufacturers and bulk buyers into one place. And so if you wanted to make something, like let's say for example you're a student and you decided to develop your own line of clothing, of apparel, there is no longer a need for you to actually buy a sewing machine and try to make it in your house. You can very, very easily find literally thousands of companies around the world that can make that product for you at a very, very good price, because they make thousands of those things. They have the expertise. So there is no way you can make same quality product at the same price. So it takes you literally minutes to find potential consumers. You go online, you log in, you decide on the product. You easily find companies that would be making products for you to your specifications. And so you can start your own business literally in a matter of minutes, or hours or days. So you design a product, you outsource the production. In a couple of days you get the product, you order whatever quantity you need. So we now live in the way where you can easily find all those providers of all those different functions. You no longer have to, for example, have your own secretary in-house employed for you. There are many services that provide secretarial services. Again, it will cost you a very, very small fee. Like if you wanted to hire a secretary here in the United States, you will be paying $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year. For a fraction, like literally a few $1,000s a year, you can get that same service, maybe even of higher quality, if you outsourced that function to companies that specialize in it. And so while you may never see the actual person face to face, there will be someone assigned to you. There will be a phone number that your clients can call. They will pick up the phone, they will introduce as your company, and so they will do all the things that your secretary would do. Same thing with accounting. So there is no longer a need to have an accountant or accountants within your company. You can outsource that. Again, if you're a big company, it may be a good idea to have your own accountants, but if you're a small company, it may not be necessarily a good idea to hire a full-time accountant. You just outsource it, pay a few $100s every month, somebody works on your stuff, and they work for many other clients, so they become very proficient at this stuff. So you get much better service at a fraction of the cost. Production, same thing, design, advertising, just about anything. And it takes so little effort today to find those companies. And the beauty is, if tomorrow, for example, your business doesn't work out, or you have to shrink, or you have to make changes, it's not like you have an employee on the payroll whom you cannot fire or whom you cannot lay off. You just basically don't renew your subscription or don't place a new contract. So by doing so, you create that further division of labor, and that dramatically improves productivity, dramatically improves cost structure. And so I don't know, I mean, Nike paradigm, it could have been a big shock first, but it actually seems to be an extremely positive thing now. Now, a series of other questions that you will have to deal with is, how do you going to structure your organization? Again, there are a number of choices that you have to make here, and we'll talk about them one by one. First, centralized versus decentralized structure. So again, sometimes you might want to have a central office and basically manage all your operations, including all your international operations, centrally. Sometimes you may go with a autonomous subsidiaries where each country's office has basically autonomy to make decisions, and so there would be no central office, or the central office would have little or no influence over the regional offices. And so one is obviously better than the other under certain circumstances, and vice versa. Like for example, centralized structure is working better when you need coordination, where for example, one subsidiary's output is another subsidiary's input, and so you need to have that kind of central nervous system that will see all the happenings at all the local branches, and will be able to put them, kind of tie them together and work. So that's, a good approach. But at the same time, if you have a product or a company, or you are in an industry where local responsiveness is key, so where you have to be able to respond locally very quickly, and it's a very different environment in each of those locations, different culture, different institutional environment, where decisions have to be made really fast, that's when the decentralized structure works better, because if they have to make those decisions quickly and the decisions are very market specific, why would you want to have a central office, let's say in New York? Guys in New York probably wouldn't know much about the operations in India, especially if it's a product that is, using multinational strategy. And checking with the guys in New York takes time. They probably will not make a good decision, so you don't want that. So you want to go with autonomous divisions that can make decisions quickly without checking with the central office. Another big advantage of the decentralized system is that it allows you to kind of see who's responsible for successes or failures. If you have a centralized system, let's say something goes wrong at a regional office, is that because they messed up, or is that because the central office made a wrong decision? If they have all the autonomy, if they are responsible, you know right away who's responsible and who needs to get either a reward or a punishment. So with the centralized system, it's not so easy to isolate the source of the success or of the problem. So again, it depends on the strategy you use. If you have multinational strategy, you probably want to go with a decentralized structure. Vice versa, if you have a global strategy, you probably want to go with a centralized structure. But again, there are other contingencies, especially, as I said, if the markets are very different, if the speed is the key, things like that. All right, and let's see if we have the answer to this question. And the answer clearly is decentralized structure, B. Now here is a short video that shows a very centralized structure.
In Vegas, everybody's got to watch everybody else. Since the players are looking to beat the casino, the dealers are watching the players. The boxmen are watching the dealers. The floormen are watching the boxmen. The pit bosses are watching the floormen. The shift bosses are watching the pit bosses. The casino manager is watching the shift bosses. I'm watching the casino manager, and the eye in the sky is watching us all. Plus, we had a dozen guys up there, most of them ex-cheats, who knew every trick in the house.
So not every organization is so heavily centralized and structured, but some are. Now, finally, a bunch of decisions you will have to make with respect to how you incorporate the international operations into your organizational structure. And let me first give you kind of a flavor of what kind of choices you have, and then we'll talk about pros and cons of each of them. So let's say you are an existing company and you operate in your country, let's say in the United States or Lithuania or Ukraine or China or Germany, whatever the country is. And at some point you start doing more and more business internationally, and so you have now international operations going on. And so what kind of choices you have here? And so let me first review all of the choices, and then we'll talk about each one of them one by one. So for example, you can have a choice where you have a dedicated international business department. So people in the international business department do nothing but actually manage international operations. So they would be making decisions with respect to all the products. And let's say you make trains, planes, and automobiles. So they would be making all those, decisions with respect to those products if it concerns crossing the border, so if it concerns international operations. So they would be literally working on the international side of your business. Alternatively, you can have not a separate division for international operations. You would just have within each of the product lines, you would have a division that deals with international aspect. So you would still have a subsidiary for, let's say, airplanes. And within the airplanes division, you would have a few people who also deal with the international issues. The same thing, you would have a trains division, and within the trains division, you would have a few people who do the international business. And then a third option would be, for example, so-called matrix approach, where you assign people and products to the projects as the need arises. And so let's talk about those one by one. So First approach or strategy would be to have what we call the international strategy, international division structure, right? So that's where you literally create a separate division where people work on international questions or issues. I used to actually work in one of those. So I worked for a company in Ukraine that specialized at agricultural everything, and so it had a number of divisions, from fertilizers to seeds to agricultural machinery. And I was in the division that had that worked with the agricultural machinery. And so within that division, my job was to basically deal with international suppliers. So I was managing a number of brands, but my job was not to sell or promote those brands within the country. I was primarily dealing with the international aspect of it, all those contracts with the suppliers, payments, things like that. And so the advantage of that approach was that you have dedicated people to international operations, and while they deal with all kinds of products and may not necessarily know a lot about each of those products, they know very well how to deal with the international problems. Like, for example, they know how to prepare the contract with an international supplier. They know how to make the payment possible. So they do all the things that need to be done for the product to cross the border and for the money to cross the border. And so by specializing, by having that specialized division, you can alleviate the other people in the other divisions of the worries of learning how it works. So they can just focus on making their trains, planes, automobiles, selling them without having to worry what happens when the product crosses the border, all those currency exchanges and custom clearance and all that kind of stuff. So that's a very good approach from that perspective, but one of the potential problems is that if you have a dedicated international division, you have to rely on those people for managing all the products, and they may not have enough product-specific knowledge. Plus, you have to rely on those people in the central office to make those decisions, and sometimes they don't have enough knowledge about the specific markets. So they sometimes could make some mistakes. So the alternative approach would be what we call the international area structure, where people stay within their product groups, but within the group you would have people dedicated to international operations and sometimes regional, specific regions. Like you would have people who specialize in dealing with Japan, and you would have people who specialize in dealing with China, and people who deal with South Korea, or your Asia division, your American division, your Europe division. So within each of those divisions, regional divisions, you would have trains, planes, automobiles. So you have like Asia division, and they make trains, planes, and automobiles for Asia, and then American division, and they make trains, planes, and automobiles for America. And as I said, there may be even more differentiation going on within the area, so that you may even have a separate subdivisions for particular countries. And so the good thing about that is that you have a lot of market-specific knowledge. So if people work and make products only for let's say Asia or Europe, they know a lot about that, and that's what, by the way, Ford Motors Company uses. So Ford has divisions in Europe, in Asia, in America, and those are almost independent companies. They make different products, they market them differently, they know a lot about their specific market. So it gives you lots of freedom, quicker decisions, more flexibility, better market knowledge. But the problem is that you also have duplication of functions. You actually have 3-4 automobile divisions, 3-4 plane divisions, or whatever your products are, and so you have separate accounting, you have separate research and development, and so as a result you probably will need many more people. Your prices, your production cost will go up, and so in many cases it's less efficient, though it may still be worth it. Then you have what they call the global product structure. That's the one where you have the headquarters, central. Then you have the global planes, trains, and automobiles. So, but then within a particular product, like for example trains division, you would have those regional subsidiaries where you have trains, domestic trains Germany, trains India, trains Mexico. And so I guess it's a good thing because you have a division both by product and by region. So it's kind of the first to combine. So you have more visibility, responsibility. You have superior market knowledge because each person specializes in a particular product for a particular market, not just an area, but particular product for a particular market. But again, it's even more duplication, even more expensive, even less efficient. So depending on your product, it may be a good idea if it's extremely market specific, but otherwise it's probably a very complex structure, unnecessary complex structure. Finally, we have what we call a matrix structure, and that's where you assign people to the needs, like either area needs, like divisions in terms of Asia, America, Europe, or product divisions, planes, trains, automobiles. And it kind of works very well in theory, and it works very well in some industries. For example, if you have an IT company and you write programs, either for computers or video games or whatever, it may be not a bad idea to use this structure. So you would have, let's say, 10, 20 programmers, and so today there is a need to develop product A, and you just take some people and they are developing product A for, let's say, market A. Then tomorrow, let's say you have a contract for a different product, and so you just move people from that project to another, and they work on that project. And so by doing so, presumably you can keep everyone equally occupied, and so you kind of have the fluid structure where the resources are moving fluidly to where they need it most. The problem with this approach is that it creates all kinds of chaos and unclarity, and it kind of works well, especially if people are more flexible, younger individuals who are moving from one project to another is easy, where the underlying task remains the same. But it's probably not so well working not so well in organizations where your labor force is older, where people just want stability and they're willing to work hard during those 8 hours, but they don't want to deal with the hassles of having multiple bosses, learning multiple projects, moving from multiple offices to multiple offices, those kinds of things. So in many cases it may be the situation where you want to do that, but your employees would say, man, I'm just 5 years from retirement, I don't really want to deal with all those complexities, just tell me what to do, I'll do it, and don't change it too often because I don't want to learn new things. And so sometimes this theoretically wonderful strategy structure may not be practical because of your resistance of your employees. Here's a question for you, and clearly it's a global matrix approach. Now, a few questions or a few comments on how you can manage your teams, and that's another big choice you have to make strategically. You can organize your people in all kinds of structures, and so you can have them work in self-managed teams, in cross-functional teams, in global teams, in virtual teams, or without any teams. And again, each of these has advantages and disadvantages, so let's talk about them one by one. Self-managed teams, it's an interesting approach. That's where you have teams that are largely autonomous, where they can make decisions independently. It's almost like a company within a company. And so usually that's a very good way to motivate people. So you give them a lot of responsibility, you give them kind of the final intent, and leave it up to them how they're going to manage themselves, how they're going to split the workload, how they're going to reach that goal. And so many people appreciate that. They like to be managers of their own time, of their own kind of business. So that seems to work very well. Plus you have a very clear accountability. So I gave you this task, you are responsible. I didn't make any decisions for you. I left it up to you to manage. And if you succeeded, that's definitely your achievement. If it failed, we know who's responsible. But then again, if you have those self-managed teams, sometimes you have lack of coordination. Sometimes you have inter-team rivalry. So you would have, teams competing for resources, trying, so they almost behave as independent companies in the market rather than parts of one organization. And so you would have that within company competition that sometimes can be damaging, right? Then you have cross-regional teams. So you might want to assemble teams where people from different countries, different regions come and work together, like accountants from different regions of your operations come together, or maybe engineers, and in many cases those would be short-term teams where they develop a particular project together and then disband. Like, for example, if you need to develop a new marketing strategy, you may take your marketing people from different markets, have them work together for a few weeks, and then send them back home. And so that's wonderful. That's great for learning. So you have more backgrounds in the team. You have more ideas. Brainstorming works well, though sometimes people may not see each other's problems, and the guy, for example, from China may not understand the challenges that the guys in America are dealing with, and vice versa. And so in many cases they may not even care much about each other, and so as a result that may be diminishing the value of this sort of cross-regional operation. Same thing, cross-functional teams. So that's where you create a team, a task force composed of people from different functional areas. A team that is composed of, let's say, some people from the HR department, some accountants, some marketing people, some production people, and so on. Again, wonderful for learning from each other, from brainstorming. So it's wonderful when, let's say, for example, accountants may not realize that there are some needs in engineering departments. Vice versa, engineers may not realize that the ideas they have may be too difficult to deal with from the accounting point of view. Or marketing, they may have a wonderful idea for something, but the engineers could say, oh, you know what, you didn't think about this particular engineering aspect of the product, so what you're saying is not entirely true. So when you have those cross-functional teams, people can quickly resolve those differences. But again, they may be speaking kind of different languages, so the potential is there, but it may be difficult to realize it because people still have very different functions and may not really be interested in each other. Global teams, that's when you bring people from all around the world, and so they work together, and so they may be born global, so it's not like they represent a particular region. They're specifically designed to be global. So again, great for learning, great for brainstorming, but again, you may end up with too much competition, too little understanding. In many cases, those teams are created especially for top managers, specifically for top managers, and they often would be people from regional headquarters, people who manage different, headquarters, and you bring the whole global team together, but it often just turns into kind of this wonderful retreat where people enjoy each other for a while, but not necessarily make big decisions. But again, sometimes there is a place for them as well. And virtual teams, we can talk about that all day long. If you're taking my course for credit, you probably are participating in X-Culture, and so by now you know the advantages and the potential of virtual collaboration, but also the challenges that come with them. So virtual teams can be very efficient because you don't have to commute, so you can be all around the world and you can still be as if in one room. And in fact, I'm a member of multiple global virtual teams, and my co-authors, my colleagues, come from all around the world, and many of them I never met in person, and so it seems to be no problem. So also you have kind of fewer personal conflicts because you focus on the task, and so not necessarily, somebody steals somebody's girlfriend, boyfriend, those kinds of things are not really going on. Plus, in virtual teams, it's been shown that since people often kind of don't see each other, don't hear each other's accents, and don't even sometimes know if it's a man or a woman, so there is less prejudice going on. But then again, the lack of interpersonal contact makes it, less personal, so there are fewer personal ties and obligations developed. As a result, people are more likely to free ride. Time zone differences create all kinds of problems. It's very slow, but I'm not going to get into that because it's a whole, not even a separate topic. It's for many people it's a separate career. So much needs to be said about that it's too much for this lecture. And a few more final comments and remarks. When you go global, you have to keep in mind, for example, the effects of tradition. So often different markets have different traditions, different tastes, and you have to adjust for them. So today we use cell phones that look like this, right? Mobile phones. But up until this, we had cell phones that had buttons on them. And so at that time, for example, there was a very clear differentiation in tastes across markets. So for example, in North America, people liked flip phones, the ones that open. In Europe, people liked the solid phones, and so many companies like Nokia, like Siemens, they were specifically making different models for different markets because you had to do that. Likewise, cars. For example, Americans love pickup trucks, and there are lots of them here. Europeans don't like pickup trucks, and so you wouldn't see many of them there. So again, automakers have to adjust their production, methods and products to specific markets. Sometimes, especially when you go international, you have to have a strategy for not becoming the bad guy. People in many countries love to hate international companies. People in many countries love to see the cause of their problems in global corporations, and again, sometimes for a very good cause. But you want to have a strategy in place to either look local or not look very big and international, because if you are looking big and international and global, you probably will be blamed for all kinds of things that you're not really responsible for, and you probably will encounter a lot of hatred and a lot of prejudice against you. And so you might want to prepare for that from the beginning. And so that's why many companies would try to pretend to be small and local. Like McDonald's, for example, would have like McDonald's Canada. So the Canadians think that it's a local company, or at least they know that the local people are employed at that company. So things like that. So be the good guy. And we talked about the Canadian Diamonds, and so other companies like the BP company, British Petroleum, tries to present itself as as a company that cares about the environment, and as you know, after the Gulf of Mexico spillover, that was kind of the image of the environmentally friendly company was damaged to a large extent. But still, it seems like by creating that aura of we care about the environment, you can kind of move from the bad guy to the good guy camp. And here's another question for you to make sure that you know what we talked about. And the answer here is D, differentiation. All right, end of the lecture. If you're taking the course for credit, this is what you need to know in the exam. Thank you very much.